The hallway outside courtroom 4B smelled like floor polish and cold coffee, and it echoed with the kind of laughter that didn't belong in a courthouse. Sergeant Rourke leaned back against the pale cinder block wall like it was a bar, one boot braced behind him, his suit jacket unbuttoned so the outline of his off-duty pistol printed cleanly against his side. Officer DeSantis stood close, too close, filling the narrow space with cologne and swagger. Between them, Marcus Hale was pinned by nothing more than their bodies and the confidence that nobody would stop them. Rourke's voice stayed low. For the audience, he assumed didn't matter. You lost, man. He looked Marcus up and down with a grin that never reached his eyes. This is court, not the complaint desk. Marcus kept his shoulders level. His hands held a thin folder and a sealed envelope, both tucked against his chest like he was protecting them from being crushed. The suit he wore was clean but plain, charcoal with a slight shine at the elbows. His tie was tied correctly, a simple knot. His face was calm in the way of someone who'd learned to keep calm because other people made it dangerous to be anything else. I'm where I'm supposed to be, Marcus said. DeSantis laughed once. Sharp. That right? He stepped in and tapped the folder with 2 fingers. Not quite a shove, but close enough that the paper flexed. What's in there? Your little speech? You here to tell the judge how we ruined your day. Rourke tilted his head toward the double doors of 4B. You one of those people who show up for the drama? His eyes flicked toward Marcus's hands. Or you got a warrant out and you're trying to be brave about it? Marcus's gaze slid to the small security camera in the corner above the water fountain, its black dome reflecting the fluorescent lights. Then he looked back at Rourke. Step back. Rourke's grin widened, like Marcus had told a joke. Listen to that. He leaned closer. You got some nerve. In our courthouse. It's not yours, Marcus said, voice still even. DeSantis made a show of looking around the hallway. A clerk hurried past with a stack of files held tight against her chest, eyes forward. 2 attorneys in dark suits walked by without turning their heads, their shoes fast on the tile. A bailiff stood down the corridor near the elevators, talking to a deputy. Both of them angled away like the conversation was suddenly fascinating. DeSantis lowered his voice. You got people fooled today, huh? His smile curled at the edges. You dress up, you talk nice, you think it changes what you are. Rourke's hand came up, palm flat, and pressed it against Marcus's chest just long enough for Marcus's jacket to crease under the pressure. You gonna look at me when I'm talking to you? Marcus didn't move, but the muscles in his jaw tightened, a quick pulse at his temple. Take your hand off me. Rourke's fingers slid up to Marcus's tie, pinching the knot, tugging it half an inch like he was testing a leash. Or what? The air in the hallway turned thin. The laughter from the far end died out as if someone had closed a door. Marcus's eyes stayed on Rourke's, steady and flat, and for a second something unreadable moved behind his expression. Something like measurement, like memory. A soft voice cut in from behind them. Sergeant. Rourke didn't turn right away. He kept his fingers on Marcus's tie. Not now. The voice came again, closer, edged with worry. Sergeant Rourke, the judge is on the bench. Rourke finally looked over his shoulder. A young courthouse deputy stood there, half in uniform, half in hesitation, a radio clipped to his shoulder. His eyes darted from Rourke's hand to Marcus's face and away again. The deputy's mouth opened like he wanted to say something else, but it didn't. Rourke's fingers released the tie slowly, as if letting go was a choice he could reconsider. He smoothed Marcus's lapel with a mock gentleness. There you go, he said, voice quiet. We'll talk later. Don't wander off. Marcus took a small step back, the first real space he'd had in a minute. He adjusted his tie with careful fingers. His breathing never changed, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the folder. DeSantis leaned in one last time, just close enough for Marcus to smell mint gum and arrogance. Whatever you think you're doing, he whispered, it ends today. Marcus didn't answer. He shifted his gaze past them, to the courtroom doors, to the brass plaque that read Courtroom 4B, and then to the sealed envelope in his own hand. The corner of the envelope was marked with an official emboss that caught the light when he tilted it. Rourke followed his eyes and snorted. You got paperwork, he said. Cute. The deputy by the elevators cleared his throat again. They're calling the case. Rourke stepped aside like a man granting permission. DeSantis made a small sweeping gesture with his hand. theatrical. After you, he said. Marcus walked between them without touching either one. His shoes made a quiet sound on the tile. The folder against his chest didn't shake. He reached the doors and pushed them open. The courtroom was crowded in the way high-profile cases always were: too many bodies, too little air, wooden benches filled with reporters and community members. A few faces Marcus recognized from city council meetings, from vigils, from the fluorescent-lit conference room where mothers had held photos of sons and begged for someone to listen. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the press still found ways to make their presence feel like lenses. At the front, Judge Elaine Mercer sat high on the bench, posture rigid, gray hair pulled back tight. Her eyes were already hard, already tired. The seal of the state hung behind her, gold and unmoving. Rourke and DeSantis entered with their attorney, Cameron Blythe, a man with perfect hair and a watch that flashed like a warning whenever he moved his hand. They walked to the defense table with the casual rhythm of men who had stood in too many courtrooms and never once been truly afraid of them. Marcus didn't go to the gallery. He moved down the center aisle, past the benches, toward the empty chair at the prosecution table. The bailiff's gaze tracked him, curious. A court clerk paused mid-step. A reporter's pen hovered. Cameron Blythe noticed first. His smile faltered, not fully, but enough. His eyes narrowed as Marcus slid into the chair reserved for the state. Rourke's brows lifted, amused. DeSantis looked over his shoulder and mouthed something that looked like, "No way." Judge Mercer rapped her gavel once. The sound cracked through the room. All rise. Everyone stood. The wood of the benches creaked under shifting weight. Marcus rose with the rest, hands at his sides, still holding the folder. "All right," Judge Mercer said when everyone sat. "Be seated," calling case number 26 CR 1184. The People versus Sergeant Daniel Rourke and Officer Anthony DeSantis. The clerk read the formalities. Names. Charges. Civil rights violations under color of law. Assault. False arrest. Tampering with evidence. The words sounded clinical in the clerk's voice, but the crowd reacted to each one like a bruise pressed hard. Judge Mercer looked over the top of her glasses. Appearances for the record. Cameron Blythe stood smoothly. Cameron Blythe for the defense, Your Honor. Sergeant Rourke and Officer DeSantis are present. Judge Mercer's eyes shifted to the empty chair at the prosecution table, then to Marcus. And for the people? Marcus stood. It wasn't dramatic the way movies did it. He didn't pause to let the room catch up. He didn't smile. He simply rose to his full height, buttoned his jacket with one quiet motion, and spoke in a voice that carried without effort. "Marcus Hale," he said. "Special Assistant Attorney General, appointed prosecutor in this matter by order of the Attorney General's office." A hush rolled through the room like a wave pulling back from shore. Cameron Blythe's face went still, not shocked. He was too controlled for that. But the confidence in his posture shifted, as if someone had changed the gravity. Rourke's mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes flicked to DeSantis, quick and sharp, like they were checking whether they'd both just heard the same thing. DeSantis leaned forward in his chair, squinting as if seeing Marcus clearly for the first time. The smirk that had been welded to his face in the hallway began to peel away. Judge Mercer's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice measured. "I have the appointment order in the file. Welcome. Are you prepared to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then proceed." Marcus opened his folder. The paper inside was neatly arranged. Tab. He took out a single sheet and held it lightly, as if the weight of it was enough. "Before we address discovery," Marcus said, "the people move for immediate modification of release conditions, specifically revocation of bond, or in the alternative, remand pending hearing, due to conduct that occurred within the courthouse moments before this proceeding." A murmur sparked through the gallery. Judge Mercer leaned forward a fraction. "Explain." Marcus turned his head slightly, not toward the crowd, but toward the defense table. His eyes landed on Rourke. "In the hallway outside this courtroom," Marcus said, "the defendants approached an individual they believed to be a private citizen connected to this case. They blocked his path. They made threatening statements. One defendant placed his hands on that individual's clothing and person. That conduct constitutes witness intimidation and violates the conditions of their release." Rourke let out a short laugh, but it sounded wrong in the room, like a cough during a prayer. Cameron Blythe touched Rourke's arm, a warning. Judge Mercer's voice remained calm, but her eyes were ice. Mr. Blythe? Blythe stood, palms open, in a posture of practiced innocence. Your Honor, with respect, that's an allegation. My clients deny any intimidation. They have complied with all conditions of release. There's no witness here, no affidavit. There's video, Marcus said. The sentence dropped cleanly into the silence. Judge Mercer's chin lifted. Video. Marcus nodded once. The courthouse hallway is under surveillance. Additionally, the incident was observed by courthouse staff. Judge Mercer looked toward the bailiff. Bailiff, contact courthouse security. I want that footage preserved immediately. The bailiff's hand went to his radio. Cameron Blythe's eyes flashed, the first real crack. Your Honor, we object to this becoming a trial within a pre-trial hearing. The people are attempting to prejudice. Judge Mercer raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Blythe. Her gaze returned to Marcus. Who is the individual? Marcus didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small leather wallet. He opened it and held it up just long enough for the judge and the room to see the gold seal and the identification inside. The individual was me, Marcus said, and I am also the prosecutor assigned to this case. The courtroom didn't explode. It didn't have to. The reaction moved in quieter ways. Hands flying to mouths, heads snapping toward the defense table, pens scratching frantically across notepads. Rourke's face drained of color in real time. His throat bobbed once as he swallowed. The memory of his fingers on Marcus's tie suddenly looked different, uglier in the fluorescent light. DeSantis's jaw clenched so hard the tendon in his neck stood out. He stared at Marcus with a kind of disbelief that bordered on panic, as if the world had just shifted and left him standing on air. Judge Mercer's eyes didn't widen, they narrowed. You're telling this court, she said slowly, that within my courthouse, minutes before a hearing in which they are charged with abusing power, the defendants put hands on the prosecutor and made threats. Marcus's voice didn't change. Yes, Your Honor. And you did not identify yourself. I did not, Marcus said. I observed their conduct as it naturally occurred. Cameron Blythe shot to his feet, losing some of his polish. Your Honor, that's entrapment. Judge Mercer cut him off. No, it isn't. Blythe's mouth closed, then opened again. It's provocation. It's a stunt. Mr. Hale intentionally. Judge Mercer's gavel hit once. Enough. Her gaze pinned Rourke and DeSantis. Stand. They hesitated. For half a second, they looked like men waiting for permission. Then they rose, stiff, hands at their sides. Judge Mercer's voice lowered and the room leaned toward it. Sergeant Rourke, Officer DeSantis, do you understand that you are under conditions of release specifically prohibiting contact with witnesses, victims, and parties associated with this case? Rourke's lips moved before sound came out. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that intimidation, threats, and physical contact constitute violations that can result in remand? Yes, DeSantis said, his voice rough. Judge Mercer turned back to Marcus. Mr. Hale, do you wish to make a sworn statement? Marcus nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The clerk administered the oath. Marcus's right hand lifted, steady. He swore to tell the truth. When he lowered his hand, his gaze never left the bench. He described the hallway in detail. The words were simple, precise. He spoke of the pressure on his chest, the tug on his tie, the statements. Don't wander off. We'll talk later. It ends today. He didn't embellish. He didn't posture. He gave it to the court the way he learned to give facts. Clean, chronological, impossible to misunderstand. While he spoke, Rourke's eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for allies that suddenly looked like strangers. DeSantis kept staring at Marcus like if he stared hard enough, Marcus would revert into the person they thought he was. Judge Mercer listened without moving. When Marcus finished, she looked to the defense. Mr. Blythe, she said, you may respond. Blythe cleared his throat. Your Honor, my clients, this is being misconstrued. They did not know who Mr. Gunsdrude. They did not know who Mr. Botter Hale was. There was no intent to intimidate a prosecutor. If there was contact, it was incidental. Judge Mercer held up a hand again. Ignorance of his identity is not a defense to the conduct. Her eyes hardened. In fact, it makes it worse. Blythe's jaw tightened. Your Honor, Judge Mercer leaned forward. These defendants are charged with abusing the authority of their badges. If their default posture in a courthouse hallway is to corner a black man in a suit and put hands on him because they assume he's powerless, then the court has learned something about how they behave when they believe no one important is watching. The sentence landed heavy. The gallery went silent in a way that felt like held breath. Rourke flinched just once. DeSantis's hands curled into fists at his sides, then loosened when he realized everyone could see. Judge Mercer looked to the bailiff. Bring me the hallway footage as soon as it is available. Until then, I am ordering both defendants to be taken into custody pending a bond revocation hearing this afternoon. Blythe's head snapped up. Your Honor, we object. Judge Mercer's voice cut through. Objection noted and denied. The bailiffs moved immediately. Not hurried, not aggressive. Just final. The sound of their footsteps on the wood floor was louder than it should have been. Rourke stepped back instinctively. This is ridiculous, he blurted, but his voice cracked on the last word. One bailiff reached for Rourke's wrists. Another moved to DeSantis. DeSantis jerked his hands away, just a reflex, and the bailiff's eyes sharpened. The room tensed. For a moment, it looked like DeSantis might do the thing he'd always done. Escalate, dominate, force the world to obey. Then he saw Judge Mercer watching. He saw the deputies at the doors. He saw the reporters' pens. He saw Marcus standing still at the prosecution table, hands folded, expression unreadable. DeSantis let his hands come forward. The cuffs clicked close with a sound that traveled to the back row. Rourke's face went red, then pale again. This is political, he said, louder, trying to find ground. You're making an example. Judge Mercer's voice was quiet and merciless. No, Sergeant. You made the example in the hallway. The court is simply acknowledging it. As the bailiffs led them toward the side door, Rourke's eyes locked on Marcus. The hatred there was immediate and hot, but under it something else flickered, fear, maybe, or the shock of realizing the world had teeth. Marcus didn't react, he didn't smirk, he didn't celebrate. He watched them go, as if he were watching a door close. When the side door shut, Judge Mercer turned back to the courtroom as if sealing a container. This court will recess until 2 p.m. Bond hearing. Mr. Blythe, be prepared. Mr. Hale, I want your written motion filed within the hour. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said. The gavel hit. The room erupted into noise. People stood. Reporters moved toward the doors like water finding a crack. Marcus gathered his papers. His hands were steady, but when he slid the folder back into place, the edge of one paper caught and bent. He flattened it with his thumb, slow. A woman's voice came from behind him, strained. Mr. Hale? Marcus turned. A middle-aged woman stood at the end of the front bench, clutching a purse so tight her knuckles showed. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her posture held, stubborn. Beside her stood a teenage boy with a healing bruise still faint on his cheekbone, the kind that had turned yellow at the edges. He looked at Marcus like he wasn't sure whether to trust what he saw. Marcus's voice softened, just a degree. Ms. Carter. The woman swallowed. They really put them in cuffs, she said, as if saying it could make it real. Marcus nodded once. For now, the hearing is this afternoon. The teenage boy's voice was low. They said nobody could touch them, he said. They said they were untouchable. Marcus held the boy's gaze. They were wrong. The boy blinked hard and looked away fast, wiping at his eye with the back of his hand like he was angry at it for happening. Cameron Blythe brushed past, his face tight with controlled rage. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked through him, like if he refused to acknowledge him, he could erase the last 10 minutes. Marcus watched Blythe go, then turned toward the side hallway that led to the clerk's office. The sealed envelope in his hand felt heavier now, as if it contained not paper but momentum. In the clerk's office, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder. A clerk stamped Marcus's motion with a loud, satisfying thud. The stamp read full in red ink. Bond revocation, the clerk murmured, eyes flicking to the case number. That was fast. It had to be, Marcus said. As he turned away, he felt it. The presence behind him before the voice spoke. You set them up, a man hissed. Marcus turned. Lieutenant Kellen stood in the doorway, thick neck, close-cropped hair, suit straining at the shoulders. He was off duty, but the posture of command clung to him like a uniform. Two other officers hovered behind him, watching, silent. Marcus's gaze stayed steady. "Move," he said to the lieutenant, not raising his voice. Kellen stepped closer, invading space the way Rourke had. "You think you're smart," Kellen said. "You think you're going to make a name off this. You're playing with careers, families." Marcus's eyes didn't leave Kellen's. They played with someone else's family first. Kellen's mouth tightened. "You walk around like you're untouchable." Marcus's voice remained calm. "No," he said. "I walk around like I have to be careful." Kellen's eyes flicked down to Marcus's folder, then back up. "You think we don't know who you are?" Marcus didn't answer. He watched Kellen's hands instead. Watched the small flecks of fingers that suggested restraint was an effort. A deputy clerk behind the counter shifted uneasily. Her hand moved toward the panic button under the desk, not pressing it yet, but ready. Kellen leaned in. "This city doesn't like surprises," he said. "You're a surprise." Marcus's expression didn't change, but his voice sharpened. "You should leave," he said, "right now, before you make this worse." Kellen's smile was thin. "Worse for who?" Marcus held his gaze. "For you." For a beat, the lieutenant looked like he might laugh. Then he saw the deputy clerk's hand hovering under the counter. He saw the small camera above the doorway, the red dot glowing. Kellen took a step back, slow. "We'll see," he said, voice low. "We'll see who the city believes." He turned and walked out, his two officers following. Their shoes made no sound on the tile, but their presence left a residue in the air like smoke. Marcus exhaled once, controlled. He adjusted his grip on the folder and walked out. By 2 p.m., courtroom 4B was fuller than it had been in the morning. The news had spread through downtown like electricity. 2 officers charged with civil rights violations had been cuffed in open court. The prosecutor was a black man they'd just tried to intimidate in the hallway. Everyone wanted to see what came next. Rourke and DeSantis were brought in through the side door. Not in suits now, but in jail uniforms that didn't fit right. Their wrists were cuffed again. They looked smaller, not because of the clothes, but because the room no longer bent around them. Cameron Blythe sat rigid, jaw set, his notes scattered like he'd written them too fast. Judge Mercer took the bench. Her voice was formal, but her eyes were sharp. "We are here on the people's motion to revoke bond." Courthouse security footage played on a screen pulled down from the ceiling. Grainy but clear enough. The hallway outside 4B, Marcus standing with his folder. Rourke and DeSantis stepping in, blocking his path. Rourke's hand on Marcus's chest, the fingers on the tie. DeSantis's mouth moving close to Marcus's ear. The sound wasn't recorded, but the body language didn't need sound to be understood. In the gallery, Miss Carter's hand flew to her mouth. The teenage boy beside her stared at the screen like he was seeing his own memory validated, the way the world looked when someone finally believed him. Judge Mercer watched the footage without blinking. When it ended, she looked down at Rourke and DeSantis. "This court," she said slowly, "has now witnessed conduct that is not ambiguous." Blythe stood, voice urgent. "Your Honor, my clients did not know." Judge Mercer's gaze snapped to him. "Sit down." Blythe froze, then sat. Judge Mercer continued, her voice low and steady. "They didn't know, and yet they did it anyway. That is the point. The court finds by clear and convincing evidence that both defendants violated conditions of release. The court further finds that they pose a danger to the community and a risk of further intimidation. Bond is revoked. They are remanded." Rourke's face twisted. "You can't." He started, but the bailiff's hand on his shoulder stopped the sentence. DeSantis's eyes went wide, the first real crack of fear. This is insane," he said, voice tight. "We're cops." Judge Mercer's expression didn't shift. "Not in this courtroom," she said. "In this courtroom, you are defendants." The bailiffs pulled them to their feet. The cuffs moved with them, metallic punctuation. As they were let out, Rourke's voice rose, desperate now. "This is a witch hunt." Judge Mercer didn't raise her voice. "No," she said. "It's accountability." The side door shut again, sealing them away. Outside the courtroom, the hallway filled instantly with noise reporters, attorneys, deputies. Marcus moved through it without stopping, but a reporter stepped into his path, microphone held forward. Mr. Hale, the reporter called. Did you anticipate this outcome? Marcus paused. His eyes met the reporter's, steady. I anticipated their behavior, Marcus said. The court responded appropriately. Is this personal for you? Another voice asked, louder. Marcus's jaw tightened just enough to show the effort of restraint. It's professional, he said, and it's necessary. He walked on. Over the next weeks, the case didn't shrink under pressure the way police misconduct cases often did. It grew. Marcus filed motions that forced evidence into daylight. Body camera footage that had been malfunctioning suddenly existed in backups. Dispatch logs showed gaps that didn't make sense. An evidence technician admitted under oath that a supervisor had ordered a video file, flagged and held. The courtroom became a furnace. Witnesses took the stand with shaking hands. A paramedic described the teenager's breathing as wet and panicked, while officers kept pressure on his back. A bystander described hearing Rourke say, "Stop resisting," while the boy's arms were pinned and still. A public defender testified that DeSantis had laughed in the holding cell, told the boy, "Nobody's coming for you." Each statement had a date, a time, a name attached to it. Each one built a wall. Cameron Blythe tried to paint Marcus as biased, as opportunistic. He filed motions accusing the Attorney General's office of overreach. He demanded Marcus be removed. Judge Mercer denied the motions one after another, her orders written in language that left no room for interpretation. The court found no bias in a prosecutor doing his job. The court found no overreach in enforcing the law. Then the pattern emerged, and it didn't belong only to Rourke and DeSantis. A confidential informant came forward, an officer from within the department who had watched too much and slept too little. He didn't want his name public. He didn't want to be seen. His voice in the recorded interview was tight, controlled, like a man trying to hold himself together with his own hands. He described a unit culture that called certain neighborhoods feeding grounds. He described street taxes taken in cash. He described arrests made to punish disrespect. He described supervisors who signed off on reports without reading them, who preferred clean narratives to messy truths. Marcus listened without interrupting. He asked questions that were careful, specific. Times, locations, names, who else was in the room, who gave the order, where the paperwork went afterward. The informant's last sentence came out like confession. They thought it would never matter, he said. They thought it was just how things were. A state-level investigation opened quietly, then loudly when subpoenas hit the department like a storm. Internal affairs files were pulled, training records, complaint histories, settlement agreements with non-disclosure clauses that now looked like camouflage. The U.S. Attorney's Office joined in, then the Civil Rights Division. Federal agents walked into the precinct in suits that didn't ask permission. They carried boxes out. They mirrored hard drives. They interviewed officers in rooms where the walls were suddenly too thin to hide behind. Lieutenant Kellen was called to testify under oath. He sat in the witness chair and tried to maintain the old posture, chin up, voice firm. But the questions didn't bend the way patrol officers usually did when a lieutenant spoke. Marcus stood and approached like gravity. "Lieutenant Kellen," he said, "do you recognize your own signature on these use-of-force reviews?" Kellen's eyes flicked to the paper, then away. "Yes." "Did you read the reports before signing?" "Yes." Marcus's voice stayed even. "Did you notice that in 12 separate incidents, the phrase 'subject continued resisting' appears verbatim, word for word, including the same misspelling of the word aggressive?" Kellen's jaw worked. "I don't." "Did you notice," Marcus continued, "that the body camera footage for those incidents was repeatedly marked unavailable by the same evidence technician?" Kellen's eyes narrowed. "That's not my job." Marcus nodded once as if acknowledging the answer for what it was. "But you signed," he said. "You validated." Kellen's face tightened. "I trusted my officers." Marcus's gaze didn't move. "You trusted them," he repeated. And in the courtroom, the words sounded like a verdict. When the grand jury returned indictments on additional officers' tampering, conspiracy, theft under color of law, the city's old reflex to protect its own finally met a wall it couldn't climb. The police union held a press conference and called it persecution. Protesters gathered outside City Hall and called it overdue. The mayor's office issued statements that tried to balance both sides, but the balance collapsed under the weight of evidence. Rourke and DeSantis sat in jail throughout it. watching their names become liabilities. They lost their badges first, suspended without pay. Then they lost their positions entirely. Then the state decertified them, a permanent mark that would follow them past this city, past this case, into any future they tried to build on the same authority. Their colleagues stopped visiting. Calls went unanswered. Cameron Blythe's voice on the jail phone grew colder with each new filing, each new denial, each new federal agent stepping into the frame. The trial came with winter rain that stained the courthouse steps dark and slick. Inside, the air was dry and tense. The jury filed in, faces serious, eyes alert. They listened to opening statements that didn't promise drama, only truth. Marcus stood and spoke without theatrics. He laid out the story like a timeline carved in the stone: an unlawful stop, an escalation, a teenager on the ground, officers using the badge as permission. Then the cover-up, the altered report, the missing footage, the intimidation. He didn't call them monsters. He called them by their names, by their actions, by their choices. Blythe tried to shred the victim. He questioned the teenager's memory, his fear, his right to be angry. He suggested the boy had been non-compliant. He emphasized the word until it sounded like a justification for anything. Then the paramedic took the stand again, and Blythe's questions turned smaller in her presence. "What did you observe?" Marcus asked. The paramedic's voice shook at first, then steadied as she described the pressure on the boy's back, the way his face had pressed into the asphalt, the way his voice had turned thin when he said he couldn't breathe. "What did you do?" Marcus asked. "I told him to roll him," she said. "I told them he needed air." "What did they do?" Marcus asked. She swallowed. "They told me to mind my job." The jury watched her hands twist together, watched her eyes fill, watched her fight not to break. When the bystander video played phone footage from across the street, shaky but undeniable, the room went quiet in a way that felt like someone had turned off oxygen. Rourke's voice could be heard, harsh, impatient. DeSantis's laughter threaded through it once, short and ugly. The teenager's voice went from angry to scared to muffled. Blythe objected. Judge Mercer overruled. By closing arguments, Blythe's confidence had thinned into something brittle. He tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a hard job, a split-second decision. Marcus rose for the people and didn't raise his voice. He walked to the center of the courtroom and let silence settle before he spoke. "This case is not about a difficult job," he said. "It is about what happens when the power to enforce the law becomes the power to ignore it. It is about what happens when people with badges decide some citizens are beneath protection." He looked at the jury, one by one, not pleading, not performing, just laying the weight down. "The defendants didn't think anyone important was watching," he said. "They didn't think consequences applied to them. You have seen what they did when they believed that. Now you decide what the law means." The jury deliberated for 2 days. The courthouse waited, held taut. When they returned, the foreperson stood with a paper that trembled slightly in his hands. His voice was steady when he spoke. "On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, guilty." Rourke's shoulders sagged as if someone had cut the string holding him upright. "On the charge of assault, guilty." DeSantis stared straight ahead, eyes fixed, not blinking. "On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty." Blythe's eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, the calculation was different. The fight had shifted into damage control, but damage control couldn't fix what was now public and permanent. Judge Mercer set sentencing for 6 weeks later. The federal judge would handle the federal counts. This courtroom would handle the state counts. The two systems moved like gears catching each other, grinding forward with the same destination. In the weeks between verdict and sentencing, more arrests came. An evidence technician, a sergeant who had instructed officers to clean up language in reports. A supervisor who deleted files from a shared drive, not realizing the deletions left trails. The department entered a federal consent decree. Policies changed on paper and in practice. Body cameras became mandatory with automatic cloud backup. Use of force reports required independent review. A civilian oversight board gained subpoena power. The city paid millions in settlements, and this time the agreements didn't come with silence. On the morning of sentencing, the courthouse steps were lined with people in the rain. Some held umbrellas. Some stood bareheaded, water running down their faces like they didn't care. Miss Carter stood among them, her hands clasped, her son beside her. He looked older than he had months ago, not by years, but by something harder. Inside courtroom 4B, Rourke and DeSantis were brought in wearing prison transport cuffs, chains at their waists. Their suits were gone. Their posture was different. They looked around the room and didn't find the old familiar ease. Judge Mercer took the bench. Her face was grave. This court will hear victim impact statements. Ms. Muntz. Carter walked to the podium with slow steps, shoulders squared. She held a paper in her hands, but when she began speaking, she didn't look down at it much. Her voice was quiet at first, then it gained strength, the way a person's voice does when they've carried something too long. She spoke about the night her son came home shaken, about the bruises, about the nightmares that made him bolt upright in bed. She spoke about the way he flinched when a patrol car drove by. She spoke about what it did to her to teach her child that the people who were supposed to help could also harm, and that she still had to send him out into the same streets. When she finished, she didn't cry. Her eyes were wet, but her face held. She stepped down and returned to her seat, and her son took her hand. The teenage boy stood next. He approached the podium like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His hands were trembling, and he tried to hide it by gripping the edges. He looked at Rourke first, then DeSantis. "They told me nobody cared," he said, voice tight. "They told me they could do whatever they wanted." His throat worked. He swallowed hard. "I believed them for a while," he admitted. "I started thinking maybe I deserved it. Like maybe that's just what happens to people like me." He paused, breath shaking. "But I don't believe them anymore." In the gallery, someone sobbed quietly. The boy stepped back, and Ms. Carter pulled him into her side with an arm that was both protective and proud. Judge Mercer looked at the defense. "Mr. Blythe. Any statement?" Blythe rose, voice subdued. He spoke about service records, about families, about hardship. The words sounded smaller now, unable to fill the room the way they once had. Judge Mercer turned to the defendants. "Sergeant Rourke. Officer DeSantis. Do either of you wish to speak before sentencing?" Rourke stood. His hands were chained. His face was stiff. The mask of authority gone but replaced with something like bitterness. "I did my job," he said, voice hoarse. "I kept this city safe, and now I'm here like I'm the worst thing in it." Judge Mercer's eyes stayed on him. "Is that all?" Rourke's mouth tightened. "Yes." DeSantis stood next, slower. His eyes were glossy, but his voice had edge. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "People don't know what it's like out there." Judge Mercer didn't respond to the argument. She looked down at her notes, then back up. And when she spoke, the courtroom felt the shift into something final. "This court has considered the evidence," she said, voice low and deliberate. "The court has considered the harm to the victim, the breach of public trust, and the defendant's lack of accountability. These were not mistakes made in fear. These were choices made in confidence." She paused. The silence pressed. The sentence must reflect the seriousness of the offense and deter future abuse. "Sergeant Daniel Rourke, on the counts of assault and official misconduct, the court sentences you to 8 years in state prison. Officer Anthony DeSantis, on the counts of assault and official misconduct, the court sentences you to 6 years in state prison. Both sentences are to run consecutive to any federal sentence imposed." Rourke's face went blank. DeSantis's knees seemed to soften, and a bailiff's hand tightened on his arm. Judge Mercer continued, her voice unbroken. "You will also be required to register as having committed a felony under color of law. You are permanently barred from law enforcement in this state. Any pension eligibility will be determined by the appropriate board, but this court's findings are clear." She looked at them both, eyes steady. "You used the badge as a weapon. The law will now treat you as it would treat any other person who committed violence and then lied to cover it. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck once. The sound felt like a door closing. As the bailiffs turned the defendants toward the side door, Rourke's head snapped toward Marcus, and for a moment his eyes held pure fury, and beneath it, the hollow realization that fury wasn't power anymore. DeSantis didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the floor as if the tile could open and swallow him. Outside the courtroom, the hallway filled again, but the energy was different. It wasn't curiosity now. It was release. People hugged. Some cried openly. Some stood very still, hands over mouths, as if movement might break the moment. "Mrs. Carter stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Her son stood close, shoulder touching hers. Marcus walked out a few minutes later, moving slower than he had on the day it began. He held his folder at his side now, not clutched to his chest. The envelope that had once been sealed was empty, its contents now part of the record, part of the city's history. Miss Carter saw him and pushed off the wall. She approached without rushing, as if afraid to rush might undo what had happened inside. "Thank you," she said, voice raw. Marcus shook his head once. "I did my job," he said quietly. She looked up at him, eyes fierce. "So did they," she said, and the words weren't praise. "That's what scares me." Marcus's gaze held hers, and for a moment the courthouse noise faded around them. "It should scare people," he said, voice low. "That's why it has to be stopped." Her son stepped forward, hesitant. He looked at Marcus's face, searching. "You knew," the boy said. "In the hallway. You knew what they were doing." Marcus nodded once. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell them?" the boy asked, a trace of anger in his voice. "Why didn't you just show them who you were?" Marcus's answer came after a beat, heavy but simple. "Because who I am shouldn't be what makes them stop," he said. "They should stop because you're a person." The boy stared at him, then looked down, swallowing hard. He nodded once, small. Down the corridor, deputies escorted a man in a suit. Lieutenant Kellen past the elevators, in handcuffs, his face rigid, eyes forward. A federal agent walked beside him, calm, a hand lightly guiding his elbow like this was procedure, not drama. Kellen's gaze flicked once toward Marcus, then away. The sight moved through the hallway like an aftershock. People watched it happen. People recorded it on phones once they reached the sidewalk. The image would spread through the city by nightfall. Authority reduced to custody, not by violence, but by paperwork and proof. Marcus walked toward the exit. Steps measured. Through the glass doors, the rain came down steady, washing the steps, washing the street. The crowd outside parted as he approached, faces turning, eyes following him. He stepped out into the rain without opening an umbrella. Water dotted his shoulders, darkening the fabric of his suit. He didn't look up at the sky. He looked straight ahead, toward the line of people waiting at the curb, toward the city beyond them. Behind him, the courthouse doors closed with a soft, final sound. Inside, files would be logged, appeals filed, oversight boards convened, policies rewritten, officers interviewed, more cases opened. The system would keep moving, slower than anyone wanted, but moving. On the steps, Ms. Carter pulled her son close under her umbrella. He leaned into her side, and for the first time in months, his shoulders looked less like armor and more like a boy's. In the rain, the city kept breathing, and somewhere in that steady breath was a shift, small, real, irreversible, where power learned it could be answered, and where the law, when forced into the light, finally held the shape it was supposed to hold.